awake, aware.
How are you doing?
Pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah, feeling a little lazy today, but other than that, all right.
It feels like there's kind of a lazy energy in the air today. I don't know what it is.
Yeah. Well, I keep getting really high before going to bed, thinking that it's gonna help me go to sleep, but then I just wind up being really high and watching funny videos and then passing out. So I don't really have a great, bedtime practice right now.
Yeah. You watch those debates?
Ugh.
I haven't seen any clips yet, to be honest with you, but I've heard they're terrible.
It's not even like I was hoping that it was going to be terrible, but terrible in an entertaining sense, and it wasn't even that. So that's really the only reason why I tune in is for the entertainment. So, and I didn't even get it.
Just total horseshit.
Yeah, it was just bad. It was just really bad.
Mm-hmm.
It was just really, really, really bad. It's like watching like I don't know, like your two grandfathers like argue who's gonna pay the check at like a family dinner or something.
Oh God.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I wanted to ask you the Mikeadelic origin story. I don't know how far back you want to go with that, but as far back as you want. I'd just like to hear kind of the backstory of how you got to where you're at right now.
Yeah. So it was a brisk fall evening. I was walking along an old sewage plant. I fell in a radioactive vat of LSD and ayahuasca, and then a microphone, and was electrocuted. And then I was just like, I got to talk about psychedelics. Yeah, no, I yeah, I don't know. That's interesting question. How far back? I mean, I feel like I grew up just always like questioning reality and just being like, this is it. There's got to be more, you know. So driven by that, I got into a lot of different things. Like I started like acting and writing screenplays and doing stuff like that in college, and just making like funny little sketches and stuff that we didn't. I think we posted on like MySpace at the time. Gives you a sense of how old I am, and and then I got into stand-up comedy when I moved to New York City after college, and that was good. That was fun, and met some people. One of my friends, Dave Smith, who's a comedian, we wound up doing a podcast together called Part of the Problem. And it was like a political show because I was getting into a lot of like political stuff that wasn't really in the mainstream, and so it was kind of more of a libertarian focus, like take on politics and just like picking apart the mainstream media and stuff like that through like a comedic lens. At the same time, I just started experimenting with psychedelics in more of like a intentional way, because I had taken some psychedelics before when I was in high school and college and stuff, but it was just like a part of other drugs. It was like getting fucked up, So doing that show, doing comedy, doing a lot of psychedelics, partying, listening to a lot of Terrence McKenna talks, Alan Watts, Joseph Campbell, just getting into a lot of different thinkers and things like that. And I just decided I was like, well, libertarianism at its core, which was like, don't hurt people and don't take their stuff, right? They kind of go by this like non-aggression principle thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, well, that's great. Like freedom, liberty, that's what we all want, right? Like we all want freedom and liberty. And so I thought there's a connection here with the experiences that I was having with psychedelics. I was like, there's totally a connection here. And then I started listening to Timothy Leary's album, Tune In, Turn On, Drop Out.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, this guy gets it. But I was really reading a lot of stuff that made psychedelics. I think you and I probably grew up in the same period with like the DARE education.
Yeah.
Right. fear and everything. So even though I kind of knew it was BS, there was still the remnants of that stuff in the back of my mind. Like, if you take too much LSD, you're going to be legally insane or something like that. So, but reading Richard Alpert, who later became Ram Dass, Leary, Albert Hoffman, and Huxley, and getting into fiction, Brave New World, Animal Farm, like stuff, Orwell, and stuff like that. Like, it was just like, oh, wow, there's a whole creative scene here that I was never exposed to through public education and through even in college. I was just bored by a lot of that stuff, and because I was bored by it, I just decided to party instead. So I started doing Mikeadelic in 2016, and and the original idea was to sort of like fuse the ideas of liberty. And I started saying cognitive liberty because I heard it somewhere, and I was like, well, that's really cool because I own my body, I own my mind, I should have freedom to alter it in any way I can. And then I remember hearing or watching Graham Hancock's TED Talk and being like, yes, that's the thing. And so I was really driven by that, and then I just wanted to have interesting conversations with people that were thinking outside of the norm, or what we call the norm. So that was the start of the show, and then I just kept doing what I was doing ever since, just getting interesting guests on, doing solo shows, just reading, being informed, speaking out about things that I felt were important, and yeah,
Nice.
that's the origin story. Is that a good origin story? I don't know.
I think it's a good origin story. So
I feel like it needed to be more entertaining. Like, I got in a fight with someone, and they're like, "You're not gonna publish this podcast," and I was like, "You can't stop me." Yeah.
Well, is any of that going on now that you're speaking out about what you think about current events? You getting any blowback? I know you've been pretty outspoken about coronavirus stuff, making funny memes and reposting a lot of information that I think is very relevant and important. What's that been like as far as, are you getting a lot of blowback? Are people pissed off at you, or are you getting a lot of people that are agreeing with you and, thanking you for posting stuff? And yeah, what's that been like, I guess?
Yeah, both. Yeah.
Yeah.
Both, definitely. I just feel like it's important to, question the narrative.
Mhm.
Especially when there's such a pervasive, hegemonic sort of narrative. Like there's one dominant narrative, and even people that I admire and respect, I'm like, I question some of the things that they say and post and stuff, and I'm like, guys, we've been lied to our whole lives. Like, it's all here. You could find out all about it. So why would this be any different? Why all of a sudden would this sort of government, state, crony elite be telling us the 100% truth? Something's fishy, and I want to investigate what that is. And if I see things that sort of add up to me and make sense, that I'm willing to, poke fun at that and also, showcase that.
Yeah, I mean it's a tough deal because on one hand I feel like in some ways, speaking out about things and even poking fun at things, it can be polarizing in some way, because people can get upset that you're offending their beliefs or their opinions. But then again, I've found so much information and value from seeing people speak out and do that. If nobody was speaking out because they were afraid of, increasing the polarization, then no information would get shared,
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's what keeps me going, is people that tell me, like, thank you. Hey, thanks for saying that. Thanks for posting that. And it's also good to have people. I have a friend of mine who's a scientist, and she posted some stuff, and I was like, "Oh, that's interesting that you posted that, because I didn't realize the inaccuracy there." And she's like, "Yeah, that this one's not really that good." But she's like, "I like what you're posting. I like that you're questioning, just like, not all the things are always," because there is a tendency sometimes, especially to be lazy and just be like, "Oh, this looks like the thing that I saw before, so I'm going to share that." So it's good to have on both sides. I'm open to compassionate criticism and curiosity, but any like negative attacks, I think, are not useful.
Yeah. So maybe you could, and I'm not, and this is only if you want to, obviously, and I'm not looking for any sort of concrete, this is what you believe, but I mean, what do you think is going on with all this COVID stuff? Like, how do you feel about it? I know we've talked about it before, but I guess on your podcast, I was mostly just going right in, blabbing about what I thought about it. But I mean, what do you how do you see what's going on?
Yeah. Well, I think that I think it's I to me my first instinct was, well, this is there's some kind of bullshit that's going on here. That was my first instinct. But I wanted to wait, and I wanted to see before just jumping on that train. I wanted to wait and see and listen to people like Dr. Andrew Kaufman, Sayer G, Kelly Brogan, some people that I had looked at in the past and been like, oh, these people are sort of good voices in the healing field, I would say, right? And then some people were like, I don't know about those guys, like, so it was an interesting back and forth of me really being like, I really don't know what to think here. But then I was like, oh yeah, what are the things that aren't being talked about? And so I started looking at some other sources and some other information. And yeah, I mean, I just think that this is largely a overblown reaction to a virus that's not good. You don't want to get it, and but I think that there are, it's not even that I think, I know, and it's like as soon as I'm going to say what I'm about to say, you get labeled as a particular camp, right? You get labeled as like an alt-right conspiracy QAnon type of person, but that's not where I want to go. And that's not what I believe. I don't believe, it's not like I'm attaching to these sets of beliefs. I'm just questioning the narrative, and I'm looking at where the incentives are. Like, why is this happening? Why have all of the things in the last 8 months been happening? There's a lot of people that do not want the president that we currently have to remain as the president, and they would go to lengths to defeat him. I'm not saying that's why the virus is happening. That's not. So there's many, many things here. And I think that one of the biggest things for me was the Freedom of Information Act that journalist Whitney Webb uncovered, that was talking about how United States and Silicon Valley type people are interested in developing the technology that China has over their social population control. And I'm like, yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. Like, why, the name of the game has always been about rich, powerful, elite people controlling more, having more resources. And that ties into everything. That ties into psychedelics, cognitive liberty, that ties into politics, that ties into the ecology, biodiversity, all the things that we care about. It ties into everything. So I see this as a way to advance more security apparatus, control, spying, technology, 5G, AI type of stuff. So that to me is the main concern. And then the virus, I just see it as like, well, it's probably this thing that's like the flu, but maybe a little bit worse. But they're using this as an excuse to do all sorts of things. The biggest transfer of wealth that we've ever seen, trillions and trillions of dollars going to banks, corporations, very little going to people. And the first question that I had about this was, well, look at how we were able to marshal our resources and do all these things like lockdowns. Look at how quickly people adapted to all the new terminology, social distancing, and all this kind of stuff. It's like, man, if we had a system of elites and government type people that actually cared, we would always be doing this. We would be like, there's a homeless problem, So what is it about this that and yeah, so it's definitely scary. The powers that be, the sort of the story of separation, as Charles Eisenstein likes to talk about. It definitely serves their interests to keep us more isolated, more separated, more afraid, and more in front of our screens. So we don't trust each other, and we're fighting with each other, and that's what we're seeing. It's a maniacally evil devised type of plan, and that's not to say that it's coming from a shadowy group of 6 people smoking cigars in a room, laughing. I think that it's there's various factions involved. So,
Mm-hmm.
and I know I sound nuts. I sound nuts to a lot of people. I know, but I've been studying this for a long time,
Yeah.
with reading books like The Devil's Chessboard about the formation of the CIA and Alan Dulles. And I'm just fascinated about secret organizations and deep state type things and history and stuff. So,
Well, and I mean, if you just look back through history, it's almost seems like we can go back a certain distance in the past, and then people accept that there are people in power who do all sorts of things to manipulate populations. But it's like once we get up to a certain present day time, it's like, well, no, you're just being a conspiracy theorist, But
yeah.
what you're saying is interesting about the homeless problem and the idea that if we truly had this compassionate, empathetic, uh, you know, scientific governmental complex, and they were truly just out for the best possible outcomes for humans, for humanity, for this population, it seems so inconsistent to think that there would be this massive response like nothing anybody's ever seen before or even really considered. I mean, nobody's ever really even considered the type of lockdowns and I mean, most specifically the lockdowns, obviously, as far as the mask mandates and those types of things, it's kind of getting down a little bit different rabbit hole. But even if you just want to look straight up at, closing all businesses except for grocery stores and big box stores and, you know, mandating that everybody stay in their homes. I mean, nobody ever thought that something like that would happen. But yet, for things like heart disease, child trafficking, homeless problems, all the different opiate addictions, cancers, toxicity of in the food and water supply, all of these different things that are just plaguing this civilization. Nobody seems to really, obviously people care, but there's no real immediate response. There's no urgency. And then as time goes on and more numbers come out and you see how the death rates just continue to go down and um it's more and more closer to like a common cold or flu every day. It just seems like what is going on here, And
Mhm.
then if you start to dig into stuff and actually hear about some of the players involved and what their
Right,
backstory are and
right.
what their intentions are, you don't have to even make a leap to think that this could be there could be an ulterior motive to this stuff. I mean, yeah, I don't know. Did you watch the full length Plandemic film?
Yeah, I watched the first one and the second one. Yeah.
Yeah. You know that I think it's David R. Martin, I think, the guy who was in that Plandemic full
Yeah, the
length.
guy with the bow tie. Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard him on a couple different podcasts now because I was like, this guy's really interesting. I check him out on a few different podcasts and where he goes even to even more depth on some of this stuff than he did on the film, and it's just like, I'm not going to be able to sit and word for word parrot what he said in those, but anybody who checks what that guy's got to say out, I mean, it's just how can you deny some of that stuff? I mean, some of the patents that were put on a novel coronavirus vaccine 9 months before the pandemic hit, and all of these conflicts of interest and illegal activity from Moderna, who won the highest bid for the vaccine contract, and just all of this stuff. It's like you'd have to be, I mean, within the context of all the other corrupt activities that have been going on in this government for how many years, it just fits right in perfectly, like I don't think from my perspective, and I think sometimes it's just a matter of it can sound crazy if you haven't taken in a certain amount of this information, but once you take in a certain amount that's absolutely verifiable with documents, it's just kind of like, okay, well, something's not right here. We're
Right.
obviously being duped to a large extent,
Yep.
and it's a really tough subject to talk about because, it really, in a lot of ways, I think it's weaponized people's empathy, you know, because it's made it so if you disagree with this stuff, then you must not care about vulnerable people, you
Right.
know. And so it gets really tough to even bridge the gap when you talk to somebody who's really, afraid or just taking COVID really seriously. And it's not to say that nobody's gotten sick or died, but if you talk to somebody about the flu, it's not going to be a real contentious conversation usually.
Yeah.
Nobody's hiding away in their homes for the flu or wearing masks everywhere because it's flu season. And we've
Right.
just it's been part of our life forever. So why is this so much different, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and they even ran that simulation event 201,
Hmm.
and there's you can find that that's a real thing, and and in the simulation there's a lot of acting, simulated responses to the narrative in the media, and
Mm.
even how we're going to deal with people who don't believe it and things like that. And my thing is like, why didn't you just prepare with like all the things that would be necessary, like masks and things like, why wouldn't you prepare that, build up that strength rather than worry about like the narrative? And that to me tells me something too, because it's always a narrative warfare. I think it was Plato that said that if you control the narrative, you control society. And
Mm.
it's really like, if those who own the stories own reality. And I think for a lot of people it's just too heavy and traumatic to come to the realization that the world as they know it is not the world as they've known it.
Hmm. Yeah, and I mean, you know, I think even for people like you and I who obviously have a different perspective on this stuff, like if I saw numbers, statistics, and saw the impact in communities around me to prove to me that this was a real, um, not just like a bad flu season, but like a real pandemic that we need to do like really severe, potentially really severe response to, then yeah, I would feel a lot differently about it. But the fact that the the data doesn't match up with what the storyline is, I think that's why people are so. It's not like you need to control the narrative if there's a real pandemic, because people are going to respect it. They're going to be scared. They're going to understand that something serious is going on. But
Hmm.
if you're just going to bullshit people and try to ratchet up cases by testing tons of healthy people and do all this silliness, it's like when there's a flu season. If everybody went and got tested for the flu, it would seem insane, like, oh my
Yeah.
God, millions of people, there's millions of cases of the flu. What's going on? But nobody gets tested for the flu, Even
Yeah.
when you're sick, you don't get tested. So it's just, I feel like they kind of came out so strong with the PR move, with the flatten the curve and the social distancing and the masks and it was a whole package, it was like a graphic design bundle or something,
Hmm.
not graphic design, but you know what I mean? It really what felt like an advertising pitch, and
Right.
it got so stuck into people's minds right away, and that initial fear of it, that it's like it just becomes this thing where, to really question it, there's so much cognitive dissonance because we haven't
Right.
there's been nothing like this as far as even in a terrible flu season. It's like people don't even really realize that it's that bad or talk about it at all. So, yeah, it just seems odd that all of a sudden it's like, well, if you're not wearing a mask everywhere, you must be a selfish piece of trash.
Yeah. 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 It's pretty wild. I mean, it is a PR move. One of my like favorite books, Propaganda by Edward Bernays, written in 1928.
Mm.
There's like a really impactful quote from that book where he talks about the the minds of the masses molded by the people in the shadows that we never see, that we never know. Our thoughts, our opinions, our behaviors, everything that we do is influenced by a tiny group of people that that the average person has no idea about. And yeah, I mean, it's even more powerful, enabled by the sort of technology that we have today, where things can move so quickly, and to get to your back to your point also about the severity of it. There's something that I do that's called having like a feeling or an intuition, and it's like when I go outside and I walk around, I'm not seeing what's like I'm not seeing bodies dropping in the streets. I've driven by the hospital plenty of times and I'm not seeing like ambulances rushing in like, and then people on the other side could say, well, it's not really like that. There's all these things that you can do to justify it and to make it seem like it's that I'm missing something. But to me, it doesn't feel like we're in this like great virus tragedy that's attacking us. And just by simply going outside and just going to the stores and walking around, I don't know.
Well, and I mean, when the straight up data from even the corrupt organizations are showing that most relatively healthy people will probably be completely asymptomatic, and not even know that they have it, or if they do have some sort of symptoms, it's probably going to be pretty minor and they're going to be just fine, And if the people who are having severe reactions are mostly people who are basically already sick, wouldn't they also have severe reactions probably from the flu or from an infection or from pneumonia or from, whatever? And if there's this increased fear and sensitivity towards like thinking that things are COVID, what's happening if are some of the normally, things that would have normally been categorized as pneumonia or flu now just being considered COVID? You know what I mean? Because then that creates a whole nother wrinkle where it's like, how many of these people would have been sick and died normally, and we never would have thought and thought about it. Like, obviously it affects the families and the people close to them, but I think people tend to forget that like every day people are dying all around the world from all sorts of different causes. So it's not like some crazy new thing that people are dying,
Right. And let's not forget that medical error is the third leading cause of death in the United States. Medical error, and it was funny because we have a tendency to think that the science that we have now is the be all end all, that it's the apotheosis of human thought, right? I went to the dentist the other day, last week actually, and I was signing the forms that you do to before going in, and my eye happened to catch a piece of it because I don't really read all of it. It's like 3 pages or whatever, but my eye happened to catch a piece of something that said, you understand that dentistry is not a complete finalized science, that blah 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 blah, that things could go wrong, or you have to ask you to come back. And I was like, well, yeah, that's what science is. It's like we think we've got the best that we can do, and now we have to keep pushing forward and asking questions and making mistakes and trial and error and experimentation and theories and hypotheses and testing those things. And then also the thing about the tests itself does not diagnose the novel coronavirus. It's even the inventor of the test says the same thing. He's like that this is not, like, it's not foolproof. And the thing about the comorbidities, as you were mentioning, people that already have pre-existing conditions, people that are elderly, senior citizens, that those types of people. And then there's also the labeling of a COVID death, where many government officials have come out on video at like press conferences. You could see, I think that I forget the one that I'm thinking of, but the woman, I believe it was in Chicago, was like saying, the question was like, so if somebody, or no, she made the statement. She said, yeah, so if you were hit by a car and then you were taken into the hospital and then you were found to have COVID and that patient had passed away, that would be labeled as a COVID death. And I was like, okay, like what? And so we're using these tests that don't actually detect the coronavirus and isolate it as the coronavirus. They're not meant to. There's the comorbidity, thing, the pre-existing conditions, and then there's also so anybody that like that makes absolutely no sense, and they're just coming right out and saying it.
Yeah.
Yeah, some guy was shot down at the protest, but we found out that he had COVID. So don't worry, it's not. It's not. He didn't die from a bullet wound. He died from COVID.
Yeah.
What?
Yeah. Yeah, it's mind blowing. And, there's financial incentive for hospitals to mark patients as COVID
Right.
patients, and if you put a patient on a ventilator, you get even more money. And so there's incentives that just capitalize on human nature, like these hospitals are capitalist, organizations like everything else. If they're private hospitals, they need to make money. So of course, if it's as simple as like, yeah, this guy's, got cancer, he's going to die from cancer, but we tested him with this PCR, which, like you're saying, the inventor of the PCR test, Kerry Mullis, it says apparently right in the pamphlet that this should not be used as a diagnostic tool, that it's not for testing, it's for other purposes. Anyways, we're using it for a test. And so if you can test the guy and say he's got COVID and you get whatever it is, 20,000 more dollars or whatever it might be, wouldn't you probably do that? You know what I mean? Like most people are probably going to do that, just like a lot of people are probably taking unemployment right now because they can get it because of COVID and they might not actually need it, or they could maybe get a job or do more work. But if it's there, people are usually just gonna take it,
That's
And
right.
so it
Yeah.
doesn't have to be, it's not nefarious at every single level. It's
Right.
like
That's key right there. Yeah.
there can be certain nefarious things from the top that get sort of disseminated, and then it's just capitalizing on human nature, fears and scarcity mentality and all of this sort of stuff. And on top of all of that, even if, okay, let's say give them the benefit of the doubt, this is, a pretty severe illness. It's a lot different than the flu. We don't understand it. It's different. It's always changing. There's 100 different strains, blah, blah, blah. Let's say all that stuff is true. Well, then what about the fact that, like, we're assuming then that the response that's been, dictated to us through the CDC and the World Health Organization is the best form of response? Like who's to say it is? Because I don't think the science is settled. There hasn't ever been lockdowns practiced. There's all sorts of dissenting opinions about it, even from extremely intelligent and, accredited individuals. And this response is coming from organizations that, and not just those specific organizations, but an entire structure that has been consistently wrong about responses to almost everything. I
Right.
mean,
Yes. Right.
look
Right.
at like, I'm sure the EPA still says it's okay to use Roundup, glyphosate, and it's absolutely destroying the land and destroying our health.
Right.
And, or look back throughout history, like doctors used to smoke in hospitals. People
Right.
said, there was lead paint, there was mercury in things, like the opioid response to pain, that's opioids are just being handed out. So I could probably think of a million different examples, but what I'm trying to say is obviously on a holistic level, these major institutions are corrupt. They're on an old paradigm. They're failing. Their responses are generally out of step with the newest, most effective um, science, and not only science, but just, paradigms of human health and wellness. So why would we assume that even if the pandemic is bad, that their response is the correct response to employ? So kind of a long-winded way to say that, but I think you know what I'm trying to say.
Oh, of course. Yeah. I mean, it's just they lie.
Yeah.
Because the incentive structure that we have is so perverse that it all boils down again, like why I'm such a fan of Charles and other people that kind of talk about the Eisenstein and talk about that kind of work, is the fact that, like, you know everything that we have created is sort of just eating us alive. And if we're going to live in that kind of environment, that we have to then sort of adapt or die in a certain kind of sense. So the people that are willing to say, like, I'll participate in predatory and parasitical perverse incentive structures in order to sort of, get mine, like you were saying, it doesn't have to be nefarious all the way, because it's not. I'm sure that there's a lot of people that are, but it's just like, it's a simple matter of like, hey, do you want to have more money, power, control, safety, and better access to things? All right, cool. So this is the flow. This is the way that the incentive structure is directing us to go. And, some people don't even question it. They don't have like, it's just, you're just in that. Yeah. Can you actually, Jacob, can you hold on 1 second? There's some noise that just happened. Hold on.
No problem.
All right. Sorry about that.
No worries.
Yeah. So, perverse incentive structures, right? Do you know Daniel Schmacktenberger by any chance?
I don't think so, actually.
Yeah, he's great. He's a great thinker, and he has a blog called Civilization Emerging, and he talks about the fact that we exist in this world where we have rivalrous games and we have exponential technology. So the technology is not going to stop. The technology is just going to keep evolving. So we better figure out a way to like not have these rivalrous games. Otherwise, with rivalrous games and exponential tech, we're going to blow ourselves up. And so that's sort of the trajectory that I feel like we're heading in, and a lot of people don't see that. They just see the immediate gain of what the system is providing for the now. And so that's why I don't like separate what's happening with with COVID as like, well, this is a health issue, this is a science thing. It's like, no, it's a political, civilizational consciousness type thing,
I totally agree. Yeah, that's a great point. It really is like the thing that I've kind of come to through my digging into this stuff, and this has been the silver lining for me, is it's really sort of just helped, like, it's helped me, it's helped push me further into just a new paradigm, a new paradigm of even understanding disease and illness and health and wellness. I mean, at this point, I'm pretty much fully on board with the terrain theory idea. The idea that these viruses or bacteria aren't these sinister beings. Well, for example, viruses aren't even alive; they're just genetic material with protein around it. Um, but that they're not floating around here with some sinister motive of just making people sick and killing them.
Right.
It's in general, nature is always striving for biodiversity, and it wants more and more life. It wants to keep things alive. It doesn't want to kill things, So that these bacteria and viruses are actually responses to generally to stress in the environment or stress in the person or an imbalance of some type. So when you say like we have bad bacteria in our gut, it's not necessarily that the bacteria are bad. You might experience them as bad if your gut is imbalanced and you have an overgrowth of a certain variety. That's really its purpose is to try to reestablish balance in the environment,
Yeah.
And so obviously that's a rabbit hole. There's a lot of other people talking about it, and but really it feels to me like if you're ready to start seeing things that way, it'll resonate with you. If you're not, it'll probably just sound like crackpot stuff or some hippie woo-woo pseudoscience.
Right.
But it really feels like that's where we're headed. Like it's a new paradigm that's emerging, and we're people like you and I, which I think you're into this stuff as well.
Yeah. Well,
Are-
I just know that, like our bodies, I just got a cut on my arm,
yeah.
and it's starting to heal. It's like it's scabbing up, our bodies, if we are healthy, if we take care of ourselves, if we give ourselves the things that we need, really, that we really, really need, um, the proper nutrition, the proper social nutrition, right? Like we need each other. We need to be in connection with other people and physical connection with other people. So all the things that I see as already before COVID happened, we were already on a trajectory of living in a more separated, isolated, sick, dumbed down, diseased, and fearful world mediated by technology and all of the promises and allure that can provide. Now, this COVID pandemic or plandemic has effectively exacerbated that ideology
Yeah.
and expedited it to bring us more into the sort of technocratic, oligarchic sort of dystopian world that masks itself in this ideological camouflage of progress and technology and the future and innovation and safety and security, which I just think is just all a bunch of bullshit because you have this sort of neo-Hobbesian view that life before the state was cruel, brutish, short, nasty, violent, and since that time, since the dawn of civilization and the advent of agriculture, which is also the birth of slavery, we have been fed the story that we would be a bunch of useless peons running around gnawing each other's arms off in chaotic frenzy for survival, if we didn't have a ruling power to guide us and to provide health and safety for us. So you need in that system, you need a series of events and traumatic events and things like that in order for that system to then justify its existence, to legitimize itself, in its existence. And this is not crackpot crazy conspiracy stuff. This is declassified documents that you can go back and look at from Operation Northwoods, where there was a false flag that wanted to blame a plane being flown into a building. I think it was by the Cuban government, among other things. They had all these ideas so that we would have an excuse to go in. And just again, just like so much stuff. Operation Mockingbird, Operation Paperclip, and it's just such a shame that when you start talking about these things, that most people will shut down, put you into the camp of Q, or call you right wing or crazy. And it's like, look, guys, like this is real. We can actually combat this if we are able to be a little bit open and curious about this kind of stuff, and be more willing to surrender into the trust of our own bodies, our own minds, our own intuition, and the people that we know and love and care about. There's a lot of people that their families are divided, their friends are divided, things like that. So and it's just like it shouldn't be this way. We should be banding together. And of course the power elites know that strength is in unity and division is the key to conquering.
Yeah, I mean, divide and conquer is a well-known phrase for a reason, I mean, it's been going on for a long time. It's funny, talking about those different operations and stuff you were talking about. The Gulf of Tonkin, I think, is one that was an actual false flag event that was
false
carried
flag
out,
event.
right?
Yep. Yeah. Gulf of Tonkin, the lie that got us involved in the Vietnam War. It wasn't even the Vietnam War. It was the fucking Vietnam invasion. The Vietnam murder. There was no reason for us to be there, but you get, the PR, the narrative. And you had a lot of people fighting against that. And, forgive me if I go on a little bit of a rant here, but I just, that time was so crucial in our existence as a country, because you had a lot of people waking up to seeing through the veil, waking up to the illusion. the world that had been created after World War II was this really romantic, idealistic world of the American dream, and it was this whole thing. And this sort of the beat movement and then the hippie movement sort of when people started getting turned on, LSD definitely having a major part in that, there was such a mass awakening where people were looking at the society that they and the culture that they had been enmeshed in and saying, this doesn't work for me at all. And the separation became so huge between the sort of normal straight society and then the turned on hippie society. The gap was enormous. And it was like we wanted to be in this other kind of world and protesting against the Vietnam War and civil rights and all this stuff. And I can't help but think today that we've lost a little bit of that like rebellious spark that and I think a large part of the psychedelic community is afraid to speak up and speak out about things that question the establishment narrative because they're working with the establishment, so to speak. They're working with the government to try and get these things legal and approved, which is good work for sure. But it's also, I don't want to live in a world where this all becomes subsumed by this machine and then we're just in this like Brave New World sort of thing. And it's like, don't worry about it. We can have endless wars. We can have, rampant capitalism and abusive predatory systems as long as we have psychedelic healing.
Right. Yeah. 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 Well, so then, what...
Sorry, I know I kind of just went off there. I apologize.
No, that's perfect. And it brings up a point for me that's like, well, for one, I feel like, the psychedelic thing, it's hard to say because obviously the government, with MK Ultra and different things, like they have experimented with using psychedelics for mind control. That crazy book came out about Charles Manson basically being a CIA operative and having they were doing LSD experiments on him, and then he, was carrying out different, obviously, LSD kind of experiments of his own with his followers and all of this stuff. So I don't know, that could go down a huge rabbit hole of if that stuff could be going on. But my instinct is more to think that, that in a lot of ways the psychedelics kind of, even though they are working within the system, that inevitably it is one of the things that's fueling the breakdown of the system at the same time. Not only people, going through the system to use it, but just it becoming more in the zeitgeist and people having more mind expanding experiences, whether with psychedelics or holotropic breathing or Wim Hof or, any of these things that people are using to kind of just like step outside of themselves for a moment. And like some of these power grabs and the intensification of this stuff and the amount of people that are catching on at this point, like there are huge communities of people that share the views that we have about this stuff.
Right.
And it almost feels like, is this sort of the purging of some of this energy? Like, is it coming to light so that it can actually be released, and so we can move on to a time where there's less control and dominance and all of this stuff? And maybe I'm being an optimist there, but
good.
I wonder that, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Because it does kind of feel in some ways like the darkness has to come out and be looked at to be released.
Yeah.
And if it just keeps happening under the radar, and obviously it's still under the radar for many people, but I think this is like watching 9/11 play out in real time.
Right.
To where the people who are trying to expose the corruption are doing it as it's happening.
Right.
Which maybe that was happening a little bit in 2001. I don't know, because I was, 19 years old or whatever. No, that can't be right because I was in high school.
You're probably like 16, right? Something.
Yeah, that makes more sense. I don't know. Anyways, I was young enough to be in high school and to not really know about, I wasn't following any governmental corruption stuff at that time. I didn't realize any of that stuff existed. I didn't think anything of it. But but I didn't notice till years later that there was anybody who had questioned it. And but now it's like so prevalent that it's dividing the entire country, the fact that people are questioning it. So I feel like that's overall got to be a really positive sign that um I mean, imagine now if if people tried something like this in another 2 years or 5 years or 10 years. If you extrapolate what we're going through now, you'd have to think that the overwhelming majority of people would be calling bullshit. You know what I'm trying to say here?
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think that's yeah, in a sense, we have a tremendous amount of trauma in the collective. It's like we've sort of been, beaten down and abused, like
Mm,
in many ways, whether it's lies about food and nutrition and glyphosate and the food pyramid and sugar and trans fat or whatever,
yep.
whatever. Pick your deception, pick your lie, pick your corruption. It's everywhere. We don't like big centralized control in our businesses, in our stores, in our farms and things like that. Why would we want it in our science and our government and our medical establishment? So it's really, fear is a big motivator, and there's a lot of people who have been thankfully doing the work and having non-ordinary states and working through the shadow and working through the trauma and working through the fear on an individual level, which also ties into the collective as well. And thankfully able to sort of pierce the veil and have a little bit of a microphone out there to say, hey, like, come look at what I'm seeing. Do you see it this way too? Because I think that's the best method. That's the best approach is to try. How can I struggle with this a lot. It's like, how can I compassionately invite people into the conversation? Because I don't believe that people just sort of wake up by like calling them sheep and yelling at them and so
Yep.
although I used to do that
Yeah.
years ago. I used to do that because I thought, well, I if I just tell people this, they'll just believe it because it's like, I discovered something that's true.
Yep.
But it's not the case because we do want to live in a world that's comfortable, to a certain degree, and that doesn't involve a lot of mass shatterings of our like reality construction,
Yeah.
because it's not difficult. So we are in a time that the shadow has come up. We are in a time where all of the sort of trauma has come up. We are in like a dark time. But just like a psychedelic trip where you could have a dark period through the trip, if you are prepared to navigate through that, there's something beautiful on the other side.
Mm, yep. So, what has been your, you know, more practical or daily response to this stuff sort of been? Because I think that could be another one of the silver linings of all of this stuff is, you know, it seems like it's pushing people one way or the other. And obviously, I know, we know now what all of your thoughts and opinions are about what's going on, but what's the response? Like, where do you go from here? Obviously, speaking out about it is important, but what else do you think, for yourself, what have you to of, well, okay, we know all this now. Like, let's say somebody does go through the process of, let's say they watch Who is Bill Gates by James Corbett,
James
and
Corbett, yeah, Corbett
yeah,
Report.
and they
Excellent work. Yeah.
check out the Plandemic documentary or David E. Martin's work, and they check out Kelly Brogan and they Sergi and Thomas Cowan and Andrew Kaufman, and you know go on and on. There's plenty of different sources out there that people can check out, and this isn't to say that, who knows, they might not all be 100% true or whatever. That's for people to decide. Obviously, I would never tell people what to think or what to consume, um, but if they do happen to check all that stuff out and they're convinced and they feel totally defeated and paranoid and angry, and it's like, obviously those things aren't going to help. We're just fueling the situation with more negative energy. Um, But so then it's like, what do you do? You know, like what's the proper response to any of this stuff? I mean, or what have you found for yourself? Like what do you feel like what's changing for you, if anything?
Yeah, so it's a combination between like paranoid, crazy, craziness and like positive, everything is perfect, all will be well, because sort of a combination of both. But no, for me, it just solidifies sort of well, I don't even know if that's the right word to use, but it just makes it more real that the path that I want to be on, it's not this abstract thing in the future that like someday I'll get to or something. It's just like, okay, I've been sort of talking shit about having my own plot of land and having my own garden and growing my own food and doing all this stuff. And it's like, this just makes it more immediate how crucial that is to have, just to be healthy, to have good social connections, to be more immersed in nature, and to be less dependent on centralized institutions and systems, and to be more to be living more in the way that I feel is natural for me. So I try and I just try and do that. So, been growing some food, got some tomatoes and things like that. And so it's just, I think we talked about this when you were on my show,
Yep.
sort of like a back to the land type of thing. So that is what I'm trying to say is that's always been, not always, but for the last like 10 years, I've always sort of been like, yeah, that's kind of where I want to be. I kind of want to be in that. That's what makes me feel alive. That's what makes me feel good. And that makes me feel like I'm really nourished spiritually and physically and mentally to be in situations that are in good harmony and balance with the natural world.
Yep.
So I'm just trying to do more of those things. And my girlfriend and I are looking at like places maybe that we can move to in like southwestern Colorado, away from the cities, because you look at what's happening and it's just like the homeless situation in Denver has exploded. There's like tent cities everywhere. There's when the protests were going on, the police were using really aggressive force, and there's just a lot of crazy stuff. And now everything is like boarded up, and you have all these rules and restrictions. So it's like, well, what's the appeal of a city really anymore?
Mm-hmm.
I don't even really see it here. Can't go to live shows, can't go to things. So it just makes it more immediate that the ideas that I have to be more in nature, more with the land, and have more of a less technology and more people in my life. That makes it more immediate for me. So I'm working on that every day to try and get to that.
Yeah, I totally relate to that. And it's interesting because it sounds like you probably had a similar feeling as I did, and I'm sure plenty of people had this of, um, like, yeah, I'll live in the city, I'll kind of follow my dreams, and once I get my sort of career like built up to a certain point, then I see myself moving out to the country and being in nature and maybe growing food and doing these things. Um, and it's more of like an abstract idea that's once you get to a certain point, then you can do that. But yeah, this really makes it feel like, okay, screw that. Like the time is now. Like,
Time is now.
why
Yeah.
not? Like, what am I
If not
doing
now,
here?
when? Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
And it brings up a conversation I had with a friend the other day, which I thought was really interesting is, you know, I find myself pushing pretty hard for this kind of stuff. There's plenty of more that I could do, but I kind of feel like I can personally, you know, see that this stuff isn't going to end anytime soon. If the COVID stuff kind of ends, I don't think the social unrest is going to. I don't think the push for increased control and surveillance and these types of things, I don't think that's going to end anytime soon. I think we're still being bombarded with toxic chemicals and electromagnetic radiation and all of these things in big cities. So, and obviously the social structures such as the political system are just completely failing to cope with the changes in our society. So I feel like this is just the beginning of a process of breakdown of the current mainstream paradigm and sort of the rebuilding of the new paradigm. So I want to be in this new paradigm as much as possible, um, starting now. But
Yeah.
I have this in myself, and I have a friend who is a little bit more secure. He's got a good job that's, he's working at a solar field, so he's not, um, he's essential. It's not affected by COVID. He's got a baby, and so a 1 year old, and so he needs to provide for her. He's got a pretty developed routine. He doesn't have a ton of free time to be like starting food operations and all sorts of different things. But he sees things the same way I do, and he knows it's important, and he wants to do it, and he wants to live in more community and have more like purpose as far as like I'm growing my food. I'm not working a job to make money to buy food. But he's sort of secretly hoping things continue to get worse so that he has an excuse to kind of bail on his job and do this stuff. And I just wonder how many people out there feel the same way, even if they don't know it, and how much this is sort of a collective manifestation of like we're creating a force to push us in the direction that we ultimately want to go, but aren't really willing to uh, make that choice
Yeah.
consciously. Does that make sense?
It totally makes sense. I think so. Yeah. Because I mean it totally makes sense, and I think that is what's happening.
Yeah.
Because it is like if you look, most people don't change until they absolutely have to.
Mm.
And most laws and rules and things like that don't really they don't get created until shit has hit the fan. And then it's like, oh, okay, fine, we'll do something. We'll try and do something about this. Or if the people are up in arms and demanding like we have to make a change here. Uh, yeah, I just think that the best you could do is just sort of try and just do what you feel is right for you. And then what I'm hoping to do is like sort of set up a little lifestyle that's as I just explained, and then have it's just there. So if other people are like, oh, cool, he's doing that, now I want to do it, or I want to go there and visit and see what it's like, or
Yep.
something. It's something in that, and yeah, in that way. I think we definitely need other people to inspire other people, to sort of give people permission as well, to say
Yep.
like you don't have to do these kind of standard conventional things, that there are other ways, and it's not like I'm moving to the woods and I'm gonna just disavow technology and become a Luddite, but it's like I want to learn how to have more balance, because this is talk about unprecedented times. We've never lived in a world where we're being constantly attacked every single day from every angle. It's draining. It takes
Yeah.
energy out of you. It takes energy out of you to conform to the incentive structure of survival that we have, in a crony capitalist world. That it's like everything you either conform to this or you suffer. And it's like not only that, but everything that we've mentioned. It's just we're constantly being bombarded. Do you know about the helpless dog experiment?
I don't think so.
It was
Mm-mm.
this experiment. I forgot who conducted it, but it's a sick experiment, because they electrocute dogs, and so they have dogs in. There's like an electrified floor, and there's a dog in one room, and every time there's like a noise, then there's also a shock. The
Mm.
floor, it's like noise, shock, noise, shock. Then in the other room, there's random shock, noise, just are random, and they're not at the same time. They just happen chaotically at all times. So obviously this is what the study proves. It seems pretty obvious to me, but is that the dog, where he didn't know when the shock or the noise was coming, that he was way more traumatized than the one
Yeah.
that knew. And so we're living in a world right now where we don't know what's happening. This is not like our ancestors didn't live in this world. They knew their environment. They knew the trees, they knew the birds, they knew the people, they knew the land, they knew the rivers, they knew the winds. They knew when things were going on. Oh, looks like there's something wrong with the fish, or oh, that's common, that happens every couple years. They had a knowledge of their environment and their surroundings, and it was predictable. And we live in a very unpredictable world where we're being bombarded and attacked by, like, be afraid of this, be afraid of that, watch out for this, watch out for that, on every level. So it's no wonder that we see what we're seeing. And I think that the sort of chaos that is ensuing needs to sort of happen. We have to, like, bleed the wound, and until enough people feel like, okay, finally I can feel free of this.
Yeah. What you just said reminded me of the other day I had this guy named Sam Thayer. I talked to him, and he's a pretty well-known forager, and he's written some really popular books on foraging, and he's just all around just sort of like a I mean, he's a very unique dude, and he's super cool. He lives very minimally. He's got an off-grid solar setup. He burns wood for heat. He's got
Amazing.
all these plots of fruit trees and wild edibles all around his property, and he cans and processes wild foods and sells them on his website, and he does like weekend foraging classes and all of this stuff. And one of the things he said when we were talking was that he feels like there's this really intense like striving in our culture, and this feeling of needing more and needing something that they don't have, and just always kind of feeling uncomfortable and frustrated. And he said he feels like for the most part that's due to this lack of connection that we have with nature, that nature is like this, and I'm going a little bit into my own words here, but almost like a friend or an elder or somebody that something that we would commune with on a daily basis and understand the relationships between, like you're saying, the animals and the ecosystem, or the weather and the crop production, or different things where we would just be so in tune, where it was like we were constantly communicating in some way with the land, with the environment, um, and with the stars, and with all of these things, where it's such a deep, fulfilling connection that's sort of infinite, that's always changing, it's always different, and there's always more to learn. To take that away from people, I can see how, I mean, it's like losing a parent or a lover, you know what I mean? Like, it's a very impactful thing that we find ourselves sort of feeling this emptiness, and we don't really know why. And I do agree that that seems like it could be a huge part of our problem, is just having been disconnected from that.
Yeah, totally. It's the wanting to fill that missing piece that we all feel, that everybody feels, and there's a certain attitude to look at the natural world as a sort of as like a spectator, or a collector. Like, oh, I went to a national park and I observed the beauty, and then I took a bunch of pictures, and I'm gonna collect that for my experience.
Hmm.
But it's like, what is the what is the deeper relationship that we can have? What can that provide? And I've experienced that through my time in the Amazon jungle, and also just in all the times that I've been on psychedelics in nature. No, but it definitely helped, because it's like, oh, the natural world is communicating with me, and I am communicating with it. As much as I participate in walking through this forest is also observing me walking through it as well. And I know it sounds to the sort of regular person like, oh, what are you talking about, whatever, but it's like, there's information everywhere we go, there's stories to be told everywhere we go. And to me, that kind of world is richer, and that really, the satisfaction that I would get from cooking my own meal from food that I grew, versus just ordering something on Uber Eats or whatever and having it delivered. It's a completely different kind of satisfaction. And I once experiencing that over and over again about how satisfying it is to build and to make and to help other people too with their things and receive help. There's more richness in that. There's more of a bonding experience. There's more of a story in that than just being isolated, separated, and just with the click of a button purchasing whatever I need. Not to say that those things can't be okay as well, but if that's all we're relying on is just that, then it's like, why even, we don't even need each other. Just get everything I need from Amazon, stay inside, and what's the problem here? But
Yeah.
there's that hole that we're all trying to fill, and we take that desire to fill that hole and put it into whatever the thing that is like, that we're involved in, whether it's like accounting or social media or whatever.
Yeah, and it makes me wonder, like, it makes me wonder about, obviously you're feeling stuff like this. I am. I think there's plenty of other people I've noticed that are sort of craving this deeper connection with nature and getting back to the land and all of this. But at the same time, there's sort of a doubling down of the technocracy of this push towards AI and the singularity and neural networks and all of this stuff. And I just listened to this Ben Goertzel guy on London Real the other day. He's a AI developer and pretty cool guy. And he himself lives in like in a country community in Hong Kong. So he's in nature. He has a lot of respect for nature. And it sounds like he spends a lot of time sort of grounding and being in nature. But he's also talking about this potential future where we could essentially just live in simulated realities if we want to. For the most part, we could, 3D print babies or 3D print anything because it's working with like actual molecules or something. So we could just 3D print like anything that exists, food, anything, and all of these different things. And I'm just thinking like, are people like us just sort of idealizing this stuff? And is the next generation not going to give a shit about nature and getting back to nature and growing their own food? And are they just going to, and then the generations to come after that, is that where things are headed? Or is this advancement in technology and AI going to lead to sort of which one could argue is potentially already happening right now, but some sort of collective nervous breakdown to where people do have to, like, there's not really as much of a choice as like, yeah, we have to ground, we got to get back to the land, we got to get back to nature, and then reassess where we're headed with all this technology, or, I just kind of, those are ideas I think about quite a bit and debate in my mind. Like, is there an inherent negative to these, intense technological artificial intelligence futures, or do we have to have this balance with nature? Because ultimately, technology is part of nature if you want to if you want to think of it that way. I mean, this is all part of nature and God, and none of this is separate from life. So I just wonder, I don't know if you have anything to go off on that, but those are just things that I've been thinking about.
Yeah, well, we get to decide. I think we get to choose the sort of like, now more than ever, the opportunity is clear that we get to choose which reality that we want to participate in and contribute to and vote for. I don't really see much change happening from traditional style, like federal election type voting. I don't think change comes from within the system. I think change comes from outside, and that change that can come from outside can have a diversity of appealing alternatives that people could say, oh, cool. I would like to think that I live my life in a way where I'm trying to balance the use of my technology and nature, right? Like Douglas Rushkoff is, with his book Team Human, and sort of what he advocates is like, let's take all the cool things about technology and make it really just work for us. So we're not serving it. We're not just being harvested and data mined and all this stuff. And in this virtual world that's just sucking our souls away, and we feel good, we feel bad, and we're depressed, and people that work for Google and stuff need to get PTSD counseling and therapy. It's like, well, we don't want to be destroying ourselves.
Is that true?
Yeah. People that do social media moderation have to, I think, have paid for therapy.
Oh, wow.
Because they suffer tremendously. Same thing with the pilots that operate drones. Because it's so abstract. You're so separated from the reality of what's happening. There's a different kind of trauma that comes from that, right? I mean, it's like it's a different kind of trauma, and I think that for me, when I think about all this stuff, AI and virtual reality and augmented reality and mixed reality and Neuralink and cyborg stuff and ships and planets and space and all that, it's like it's cool, but it's like what are we willing to do? What are we willing to sacrifice as human beings to get to that point? And also, why are we getting to that point? Where does it end? What's the ultimate goal here? Because to me, that way of thinking is the linear model of perpetual progress that just it doesn't, like, we all experience that in our regular lives. We see the stories of the celebrities who made it big and got all the money and got all the toys and got all the things, only then to have a crisis moment and be like, what does it all mean? This is, so why are we embarking on that collective mission as a civilization? It's like, so I think we really need to wake up to a point where we say, oh, okay, nothing is inherently good or bad, that everything can be used as these tools of what we bring our intention and how we imbue it with a sort of meaning, and how do we want to use it? How do we want to relate to it? And it's going to be tremendously hard, but I have faith in humanity. I think we're going to get there. I think we're going to go. We're in the midst of a really difficult time right now, and we're going to go through a really difficult and challenging experience. But I do see light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah, I think the harder we strive towards these things, more of this stuff will probably come up, it feels like to me, because it's sort of like, I don't know if you've experienced this. I experienced, as I really hit my strong desire to sort of fulfill my dreams, and like manifest my dreams and, have a podcast and be a musician and really sort of my
I'm loving the tracks that I've listened to so far, by the way. And
thank you.
And the artwork. It's awesome, dude. So congrats on putting that out. It's super awesome.
Thank you, man. Appreciate that. But yeah, as I like kind of transitioned from being all right with having like a stable job and doing my thing to really trying to pursue dreams and be, kind of use my individual will to manifest my reality. It simultaneously seemed to bring up a lot of my trauma and things that I had underneath that sort of are the bridge between where you're at and why you've been comfortable with a stable job and the future you want. There's sort of a chasm there that you start to begin to become aware of as you travel in that direction, at least for my own sake. And I sort of feel like I could see that being part of what's happening as a collective. Is we've got this thing, we want to create AI, we want to do this stuff, we want to manifest these visions we have, and not even visions, but just sort of like desires. But it's like life feels like it has this built-in mechanism of protection to where it's got sort of an electric fence, like it's not going to allow you to get the thing you desire until you've purged yourself of the maladaptive patterns that are keeping you from achieving it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally. And then when you do that, it's like this gateway opens, as Joseph Campbell would say, when you follow your bliss, doors open where there were only walls before. And I've experienced that to be true. When I am able to say, for example, the last mushroom ceremony that I had for myself. I like to do mushrooms at high doses in a ceremonial way. And lots of things came up for me. And I was able to have such a clear vision as to what they were. And funny enough, it was like, oh my God, this little piece of trauma that I thought I dealt with, there's still a remnant there that was 1 degree to the left that I didn't inspect, and I didn't realize that that was guiding me to make these decisions, to do these things. So that the clarity gained is, and it's able to sort of like take all this stuff that had been shoved into a closet that I was like, I'm gonna clean that one day, and it just comes out and it piles out, and I'm like, oh, okay, I guess I'm gonna sort through it now, and I'm able to sort through it and clear it all up. Then I'm able to start to move forward in the direction that I want to with such uh, with such ease. I feel like, and not to say that it's easy, but with more of a lighter foot forward,
Yeah.
you know. And that lighter foot forward, there's some kind of that inertia of putting myself forward in that way creates some kind, it starts the wheels of the synchronicity machine, and it's like, all right, ramping up synchronicity, and then things start to come into my orbit, and I start to get into other things orbit, and it just sort of pieces together, and it's like, wow, I'm feeling good. So I think that there is truly something to that. I think that a lot of the problems that we see, a lot of the conflict is because we are unhealed from our
Yeah.
deepest wounds, from our ancestors' generations, epigenetic, trauma, and even further back, that it's going to require it's really going to require facing that stuff that we don't like, and I would say that to a large degree that we're seeing it play out in all of our systems and all of our institutions and all of our businesses, in all of our value structures and all of the languages that we use and the images that we watch, and everything that we see and hear is all coming from a very unhealed shadow traumatic realm.
Yep.
And we're looking at it. We're looking at it in the world, and we're going, oh, we don't like that. I
Yeah.
hate I hate Donald Trump. I hate him. It's like,
Yeah.
well, yeah, he sucks. I mean, he's not, but I also look at anybody that, because I found this in myself too. Where's that in me? Where is that part? Because I truly believe that we all have selfish parts of ourselves. We all have parts of ourselves that we don't really
Yeah.
like, but it's okay. It's a part of us. It doesn't mean that we are attached to that particular sliver of identity. It's just a part. It's just a one little piece, and everybody has it. And I think that, it reminds me of like when we bleep out curse words, or I saw on like I remember seeing on a billboard in New York one time, it was like the show, this cop show, it's like they don't give a F, and then like asterisks and stuff. It's like, why are we hiding that? Like it's like we can figure out what it means. Like we deny reality to fit this sort of manicured, like protected, sanitized view. You know what I mean? You know what I'm getting with
Yep,
this? It's
I
like
do.
we don't want to admit that we don't want to admit that we all have little pieces of monsters inside of us,
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And it's so prevalent in the culture, like you're saying. There's such weird things that we just kind of take for granted, but when you really inspect them, like the fact that um, sex and nudity is so taboo, but violence is so prevalent. I
Right.
mean, you can show your kid a movie where, somebody gets their head cut off or people get shot, and people don't think too much of it. But if you show your kid a movie with a sex scene or something, or a bunch of nudity, it's going to be real taboo. And that's just so twisted to me. Or
It's
even just to
so, yeah.
have a conversation with a kid about sex and sexuality and genitals, and calling genitals by their actual names, not like, oh, it's your pee-pee or it's your whatever.
We.
There's just such a weird, but then everything is hypersexualized. Kids are sexualized. Adult women are made to look like kids to be sexualized. Think of the Britney Spears and the Christina Aguileras, and I mean, I know that's a little beyond the times at this point, but you know what I'm trying to get at is,
I know what you're getting at. Yeah, I think it's a result of that sort of, oppression.
mm,
It's like a result of this covering up, this not wanting to look at the shadow pieces, not wanting to look at the bits that scare us or whatever. And it's like, as a result, what happens is the thing that pops out on the other side, instead of a holistically healthy, well integrated model of human nature, that we get this hyper sexualized, this
mm,
hyper aggressive binge drinking, this hyper drug, all these
yes,
coping mechanisms, as Gabor Mate would say, like these coping mechanisms that we use to deal with the world that we find ourselves in. And yeah, I was just laughing because it's like, you're so right about that. You could sit around the dinner table with your family and put on an episode of like The Walking Dead where zombies are literally like chewing people's faces off.
yeah,
But like, oh no, be careful. A woman's nipple is exposed. Like, you
right.
can't see that, little Johnny. It's
Right.
like,
Like women get just berated for breastfeeding in public or something. It's like the most human act you could possibly do. Feed a
right.
child with your own body is somehow looked at to be like, you know, disgusting to some people or just to be should be hidden away in some way.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Hide it away. Don't show it. That's not what we do. That's not what is acceptable in polite society. Very puritanical, right? Like, I mean,
mhm.
there's definitely something to the fact that white European people seem to be have something in them that just isn't fully. Maybe that's the case. Maybe other, and I'm wildly speculating here. I didn't read anything about this or anything. I'm having like just a stoner thought here. But maybe that's the case, is like, in terms of individual healing and going through that process, maybe as a race or a group or a geographical area of people need to sort of evolve past that point. I don't know. Just a
Yeah.
guess.
No, I know exactly what you're saying. It's like I often wonder in general, what is it about European civilizations that made them so different? You know, like why is there such a
Maybe
different?
they're aliens.
It's possible,
Aryan
but
aliens.
Aryan aliens. That's my new band name. But but no, some of that stuff. I think a lot of the stuff we're talking about feels like this combination between natural, like repressed shadow things, but also there's with a mixture of deliberate um mechanisms of control and manipulation, because even the breastfeeding thing, I can't remember exactly, but I remember hearing about some big massive corporate PR pitch to convince women to use formula. I can't remember what it was, but people would have to look into that. But there have been things like that where people's minds just get manipulated into think like, oh, well, if you're well off, like you use formula, it's just better, like especially, in public, you're not going to just expose your body, I don't know. It seems
Yeah.
like with the more you dig into all these different things, there's always a mixture of both, like there's
Hmm.
some corruption and there's just some, whether it's trauma that people then repress things because they have this collective trauma, then they allow it's easier for them to be allowed, or it's easier for them to be manipulated due to them having this sort of uncovered trauma.
Yes, yeah. But bodily shame, right?
Hmm.
So, and religion, right, plays into
Yeah.
that, the especially the sort of Abrahamic religions, the big three, is, especially Catholicism. That's what I grew up in. And so there's this shame, this sense of taboo. And so if you have that baked into people, whether it comes from religion or whether it just comes from your family structure and your community and your area in which your environment, um, then it's like, oh wow, there's all these openings for advertisers and corporations and banks and governments and educational systems and entertainment industry to cast their line into those openings and hook onto those emotional trigger points and
Yep.
be like, yeah, you're not good enough, you need this. And
Yeah.
so totally, yeah, they go together. It's this like catch 22 almost. It's like we can't really change the laws and the rules until the people are ready to accept the changes, but the people won't be ready to accept the changes until someone leads the way with a change, which is why I always look at like that. You asked me about that debate in the beginning of the podcast. I'm like, guys, like this is supposed to be like, we're supposed to be making a choice who we want to lead our nation.
Yeah.
Like, these are not leaders. These are not wise old elders with comprehensive knowledge and holistic knowledge. And that is really where I see one of the biggest gaps in people's thinking is like, do we really have people that are leaders, or are they just rulers? Where they're just predatory psychopaths that are attracted to power and want to hoard resources and fuck people over, and
Or
yeah,
even just at best, like essentially just puppets,
yeah, just puppets, yeah.
At best, people who are just worked their way through a corrupt system, because they wanted some notoriety or they wanted to feel important, like, oh, I'm the president, But it's really just you're the president because you allowed yourself to be manipulated, or you were willing to forgo your integrity and take money from various different places and tweak your opinions based on who would give you money so that you could get to this position. And that's I think, sort of a fundamental, capitalist feature. You don't even need to necessarily call it capitalist, but you know what I mean? A feature of the society that we've lived in until now. It's like if you want, the number one hit record, if you want to be the biggest actor, if you want to be the president, along the way through your journey, you're going to have to tweak your opinions. You're going to have to change your looks. You're going to have to,
You're gonna have
you know
to
what I mean?
sacrifice your baby to Baphomet. Yeah.
So by the time, you know what I mean, you start out as Limp Bizkit doing $3 bill y'all, and then you make, did it all for the nookie, and you look back and you're like, what did we turn into? You know what I mean?
They did it all for the nookie. That's
yeah,
what it is.
exactly. They said it right in the song.
The reward system, the perverse incentive structure set by what I call the power elites is I don't fucking see Edgar Wright called him that in his book, The Power Elites. But I like to use that term because was that the right guy? No, Edgar Mills. Fuck, I forgot his name. All right, you'll find out and make me look smart later. But they set the precedent and the tone for the reward system that gets doled out to the people that play according to those game rules. So it's like, look, all of these things that we're talking about, it's clearly the people that we are saying are hallucinating to be some kind of leaders or something like that. There's a set of game rules that say you will get consolation prizes. So Limp Bizkit doing it all for the nookie. The nookie is a sort of consolation prize, because the real prize is like a whole baked in, healthy, sexual, romantic, intimate, deep, connected sort of relationship. But we live in a culture where it's just like, bang as many people as you can and get all the money that you can. And it's like, well, yeah, obviously people are going to be drawn to that because that's the only reward system that is within the confines of this allowable, construct of reality.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
It does. It does. And it was C. Wright Mills.
Yeah. C. Wright Mills. I don't know why I threw the Edgar in there.
But it's it reminds me of the way Charles Eisenstein talks about some of this stuff, which really resonates with me, is this idea that, our culture for a long time has been all about take something that would normally be like a human birthright, take it away from them via, civilized society or whatever, and I'm not saying this is all intentionally manipulative. Like we've all co-created this situation.
Right. We're all
But just
participating in it. Yeah.
but just as a way to explain it and break it down, it's like take something that would have been uh, part of our human experience, part of our culture, take it away and then sell it back. So, pollute the waters, sell bottled water, isolate
Right.
people, sell them, FaceTime or whatever. And, you could go on and on and on. It's like take away, you know, remove people from the abundant lands of wild food and gardens and sell them, Whole Foods or
Yeah.
whatever.
One of the big ones, take away an open, healthy sexuality, and
Mm,
then it manifests in this perverse
yes.
pornography and the pornography
And strip
addiction,
clubs
strip
and
clubs, and degrading people and women.
yep.
And yeah.
Yep. Yeah, so I see that, that really resonates with me, and you can see it going on all over the place. Even take away a child, take away a tribe where you have multiple adults, um, teaching kids every day on their own about nature, about the land, about, the wisdom of the tribe, and throw them in a school system that's meant to make them a cog in a machine and be comfortable with working, you know, factory hours and all of this stuff. Um, and I think, what you're talking about the debates. Um, I think, I've been having this conversation with a couple different people about voting or not voting, and there's a really strong push right now to vote for Joe Biden because Trump is like nothing we've ever seen before. He's so dangerous that we understand that it's the lesser of two evils. And even for people who have said, like, I haven't voted, I know Dan Carlin, if you're familiar with his work, put
Oh
out a
yeah.
podcast recently basically saying, he hasn't voted for a major party candidate in like a decade, and he
Yeah. Me
is an
too.
independent and all of this stuff, but he's going to vote for Joe Biden because he feels
Oh.
like there's a civil war at stake, and Trump is just sort of taking things to a new level that we've never seen before. I can understand those arguments, and maybe I'm just being overly idealistic or hanging my hat too much on the metaphysical nature of reality, but I just can't help but feel like even something such as watching the debates or talking about the debates, which I'm not saying I'm holier than thou because I'm talking to you about them and I've seen people talking about them on Twitter and I'm still in that realm to an extent. But it just feels like the more attention we put on this stuff and legitimize it as like an actual thing that has real value and meaning, we're just sort of consenting to something that really does no real good for us and we have no real control over. I mean, we have been given two candidates that we're supposed to pick from,
Yes.
while
Right.
all the other candidates are actively smeared and shut down. And there's been so much research on people are all worried about voter fraud due to either mail-in ballots or the fact that Trump doesn't want mail-in ballots and all of this stuff. But if you look into the history of voter fraud and the how easy it is for people to hack these voting machines, and the people who own and operate these voting machine companies, that have ties to the Clintons and all of these different organizations, I wouldn't be surprised if almost every single election is manipulated in some variety, even if we did have the candidates we wanted in there. Like even if Bernie Sanders or Tulsi Gabbard or some person that we did think was great got in there, I think there's people that have so much at stake regarding who's in power, they'll do whatever it takes to get the result that they want.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I've been a proponent of not voting as a protest vote
Mm,
for a long time. In fact, I made a YouTube video in 2015 or 2016, I think, about it. And my reasoning behind that is similar to, I think, what you said. It was like, let's let us smart, intelligent, beautiful, unique individuals make a choice over our own sovereignty of our let's own up to our own consciousness and our own reality that we want to experience, and simply divert our attention away from all of these things that are demanding our attention, that are relentlessly demanding our attention with all kinds of panics and fears and things like that that do have real world consequences that are not so great. Um, so I am very much, I think it was Philip K. Dick in his novel Valis that said, those who fight the established system become infected by its derangement, only to then become the thing that they're fighting against.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I see that. When I was growing up as a kid, uh, and as a teenager, I got into a lot of fights. Like I didn't necessarily start them all, but I was just in an environment where that happened. And I noticed that like nothing really changes. You're just fight. You're always in a war. You're always in a battle. You're always in a fight. It's always, if it's not this thing, it's the next thing. If it's not voter fraud, it's something else. There's always something that you could find. So I think that, we look at the candidates that have been selected to us, and I just think they're both shit. I think I think all the parties are shit. I think the whole system is fucked. So I'm like, why don't we just stop paying attention to this? Don't contribute any of our most precious resource, which is our time, energy, and attention, into this, and instead start talking with other people about new ways of being. And that sort of also requires a level of civil disobedience as well, which can be scary for a lot of people because you're going against the law. But the law doesn't necessarily equate with what's good for you and me and for other people out there that feel a pressure and feel a sense of instability. But there are people out there that are desperately seeking other ways. And I think that all these institutions and all these things that we have that we look up to and the traditions that we like to honor and pledge to and this stuff can be reinvented in a diversity of new ways, because they're all just constructed by people. They're just constructed by us. And if we can, and I think that really, like what we were talking about before, it's going to take shit really hitting the fan until people really wake up and say, oh yeah, like we don't have to go down this road, that we can actually choose to put our attention into other things that can then grow. I posted something about this the other day about how everything that we grow in this garden that has a toxic soil is not going to produce the kind of vegetation that we want. So we need to start and to repair the garden. It's a nightmare. It's overgrown. There's all kinds of bugs eating the plant. It's just toxic food. The soil's ruined. So we need to move to new gardens. We need to plant new soil and a diversity of seeds and see what takes place there. Yeah, I get a lot of criticism for sort of advocating not voting. People think that it's um, going to do more harm than good because they see Trump as being this real existential threat to our reality, to this. He's this evil guy, and I'm like, look, he's just a symptom of what we've allowed. He's a symptom of the problem that we've allowed, and I suspect that a lot of people that are on the radical left really want. And there's a radical right, there's radicals on both sides, but the people that really have this like, well, we got to get him out and we got to get Biden in. I think it's really just this call to like, I want this trip to end, make it stop. It's a bad trip, just make it stop. It's like we want to get back to sort of going to sleep again, so we don't have to worry about the cancer at the rot at the core of our culture.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like your soil analogy because it's just so relevant as to what the other things are going on, as far as how much all of our farming practices are just so terrible in this country, and how we don't only have something like 6 harvests left or something until most of the farmland in the country is borderline unusable. But at the same time, there's this emergence of regenerative agriculture, and it's gaining in popularity. There's a new Netflix documentary out called Kiss the Ground that's really great, talking about that stuff. And um and along with regenerative agriculture, I feel like there are other different solutions for problems popping up or bubbling under the surface. And it just feels like putting more attention into the next paradigm, the new things that are coming, the solutions, versus pouring all our energy and getting exhausted over should we vote for Biden? Should we do, whatever? It just seems like the more we can put energy into the solutions, the better off we are. And
Yeah.
The Biden, I obviously this is a deep topic and there's so much, you know, that we could get into, but it's the the voting for Biden and thinking it could solve the problem feels akin to the idea of, taking an opiate for a back issue that needs stretching and a weight gain, like changing your diet to lose some weight, stretching it out, maybe getting a different career that doesn't hurt your back. Maybe, there's how many different variables that probably need to be addressed. But saying like, oh, okay, well, I'm just going to go get the prescription for the opiate and hopefully that makes it better.
Yeah.
And maybe there is an argument for, hey, you take the pain medication so that you're not completely overwhelmed by pain and that gives you some freedom to think about solutions and changes, maybe. But in my experience, sometimes that can just lead to you thinking that maybe the problem is solved and you go back to continuing to do the same things you were doing before. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I like that analogy because it harkens back to what you said earlier in the podcast about how, that we just like it's like we just want to do what's easiest. That it's not necessarily like there's this nefarious drive or whatever, but it's just like we just want to do what's the easiest thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the easiest thing to do is just be like, look, just vote for Biden, get this guy the hell out of there, and we can have some kind of illusion that there's been some change created, because we
Yeah.
participated as slacktivists in yeah.
Right.
I don't mean to. It's tricky. I don't mean to like disparage people that feel that way because I understand where that feeling comes from. But I find myself having this sort of short circuit moment where I'm just like cannot
Yeah.
compute. Like I'm like I don't understand. Like the thing. Like every 4 years it's the same shit, guys. Like it's the same thing. Like we're nothing. There's been no radical, fundamental, revolutionary shifts, and nothing of substance was talked about in the debates. Nothing of substance is ever really talked about in the debates, unless you have guys like you mentioned Tulsi, Bernie, and I would say also Ron Paul, who was a big inspiration for me early on. He was like a matrix breaker. He's there people are debating about things that are the debates always go in this sort of like pre-approved, like, okay, this is the realm that we're allowed to talk about. And you have people that are coming in that aren't beholden to that, to say, what about these wars that have been going on forever? Like, isn't this a problem? Like, what about the fact that the war on drugs and the prison like, so it's a big thing. And like you were saying with the medication, with the opiates, there's this great quote by a friend of mine who I worked at the Ayahuasca Center at, and she said, in the West, we prescribe medications. Medications suppress symptoms, and they make people feel better sometimes, and sometimes it's appropriate. And she's talking about ayahuasca here. Ayahuasca is a medicine. It doesn't suppress anything. It brings everything to the surface. So instead of running away, you actually have to face yourself. You actually have to face difficult emotions. You have to face physical pain, and you do it in a ceremony space. And by facing this, by what's sitting within and breathing through it, you can move through it, and that's where the healing takes place. And I love that distinction between medication and medicine, because we are a very medication culture, and it's not just in the actual medication, what we see with the evil, corrupt pharmaceutical industry, but that model of managing symptoms is everywhere. It's just like get people hooked, get people addicted, whether it's social media or politics, a political party or something like that, get them hooked, and then just kind of manage their symptoms.
Yep. I like what you're saying about sort of the accepted, um, what would you call it? The accepted, realm of debate, or the accepted,
Yeah,
you know what I'm,
the pre-approved playpen of allowable expression,
yeah,
debate, and opinion. Yeah.
exactly. I think Noam Chomsky talks about that and has a word for it.
Oh yeah.
That thing, but even thinking back to like Ralph Nader and Ross Perot and these
Oh
people
yeah.
who just like, kind of were radical people for their time. Um, it it really does make you see how indoctrinated we are to the when you see these debates, when it's like, okay, do you think this or do you think that? Like, you've already got the two options. It's got to be one of the two, Trump or Biden. And one of the things I really, I don't know how familiar you are with Jimmy Dore. He's
Yeah,
a
I
pretty
know Jimmy Dore.
hilarious guy,
I
and
like Jimmy Dore. Yeah.
yeah, he's got a lot of great info. He can be a kind of an angry character, but
Yeah.
we need people like that, in the world. So, anyways, he has this great point about nothing's going to ever change if you're always willing to immediately pledge your vote to somebody before they ever tell you what they're going to stand for. I mean, even before it was Trump and Biden, there were all these, well-known people coming out to say like, I support Bernie, but at the end of the day, I'll vote for Biden if Biden's the candidate. And it's like already they know, okay, it doesn't matter what we do as long as we go on, we're better than Trump. We're not Trump, we're not the bad guy with orange hair, then we can do whatever the hell we want. You know what I
Yep.
mean? We
Oh
don't
yeah,
have to support
totally.
Medicare for all, or we don't have to figure out, doesn't matter. Pick your thing that you're passionate about.
Right.
If the corporate interests don't want it, they know they don't have to appease the people because they're
Yeah.
so scared of Trump that they'll do whatever, whatever it takes. They'll elect whoever you put in front of them that's not Trump.
Right. Yeah.
And if people consistently do that and Biden gets voted in, well, then what's going to happen next time? Who's the next Trump going to be, and how bad is he going to have to be to continue to get people to buy into this lesser of two evils situation?
Yeah, and I just look at it, it's just such a time suck. It's like, what does this actually have to do with our lives on a daily
Yeah.
basis? It's like such a time suck. And the media fans the flames, and because they get the legacy establishment media was dying, totally
Yeah.
dying, and the pandemic has boosted up their rating, and all this fear porn gives them more ratings, and that's great because that's what they want. They want more control and domination over that marketplace. So yeah, just look at, like, I don't know how familiar you are with sports, but in
Pretty familiar.
yeah, in the pretty familiar. Usually it's like a game where someone wins, and sometimes there's a ball involved. I
It
meant to say
depends what the sport is.
I meant to say football. Yeah, there
Yeah,
was
football,
like
sure.
few years ago, maybe it was longer than that, but there was this Patriots scandal, Tom Brady and the
Yeah.
deflated balls and all this stuff, and
Deflategate.
yeah, Deflategate, right? So it's like, how many Patriots, diehard loyal Patriot fans were like, yeah, that was a mistake. We probably shouldn't have done that. That was cheating. Yeah, that wasn't so good. No, they're defending their team to the death.
Yeah.
And that's just the mentality that we have in our entire culture, is that
Yeah.
team warlike mentality.
Which is a very toxic and destructive mentality. I mean, even the news, for how much people in the news seem to hate Trump, and they sure give him so much airtime. I remember the first round, with the Hillary Clinton versus Trump and Bernie Sanders in the mix. Um, I remember hearing stats about how many hours of media time Trump was getting, just astronomical numbers, where I remember they were showing a Trump's empty podium on the news instead of showing Bernie Sanders speeches, and just things like that, where it's like again, back to the perverse incentive uh, motives that you're talking about, where it's like they make more money, and actually, arguably, they could have made just as much money if they would have televised Bernie Sanders' speeches because people were desperate to hear those types of things. I think people still are, which is why he has a massive following. And unfortunately, he's kind of used his position to sort of attempt to corral people into the establishment Democratic Party, which is unfortunate. But the spirit of what he was saying, even if you disagree with the politics, just the spirit of like,
Oh
hey,
yeah.
we're the little guy, we're the 99%. Let's get together and do this ourselves. Let's get in the streets. Let's do grassroots things. Like we can make this, we can make it better, and highlighting the corruption of the system. Like nobody had ever, that stuff sounded like conspiracy, I think, to a lot of people before Bernie Sanders. Once Bernie Sanders was laying it out there for people, now it's just in the zeitgeist of, you know, the 1% and the 1/10 of 1%.
Right.
So I don't know really where I was going with all that, honestly. Oh yeah, I mean, the just the how much the media for for money will give so much attention to something that people claim to unanimously hate and want to, you know, get out of the White House. It just, yeah, it's so counterintuitive, and it seems to really, it's fueled Trump. You know what I mean? The constantly talking about him and showing him on the news and ripping on him constantly. It's fueled the supporters of him that much more.
Oh
It's
yeah.
legitimized this idea of fake news because they're constantly, skewing everything he says to seem way crazier than it actually is, or, you know what I mean? They can never acknowledge maybe something positive that he's done, because I'm sure he's done a few positive things here and there. Um, it's just like people don't understand that if you constantly have this inflated idea of how terrible the guy is and you only focus on that and constantly put it out there, you're just making people think, well, I watched what he said and it wasn't that. So either you're lying or, you know what I mean? It just makes people, kind of fuels the people who are supporting him.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's like he serves a purpose. He's almost like a heel character in WWE, you know?
Mhm.
He's like, it's like, pay attention to this angry orange guy who is, of course, we could all agree, not good,
Right.
not a good person, not doesn't espouse and embody the sort of ideals that we would wish to have. But let's just make him the devil. This way, we could just project all of our bad feelings and all of our hate onto him. He's the perfect vessel for that. And then, we can we that and by that, it's a great distraction that we don't have to worry about all the other shit that's going on, that's always constantly going on by the unelected establishment rulers of the country. And what's sad is that deep state has been now associated with QAnon and Trump. And I've been researching and reading about the deep state, or the
Yep.
shadow government, or the sort of, whatever you want to call them, the unelected influencers
Yep.
of that use this mechanism, of this tool that is this mechanism of power to their advantage, the corporations and the banks and all the other people that get involved, Silicon Valley and all the rest of them, and the intelligence agencies, the alpha, all of these agencies, and they're all doing just fine. They're doing their thing. They're
Yep.
doing what they do, and we still have the economic structure that we have. Everything is still the same. So it doesn't really matter to me who is the puppet, who is the cultural mirror of the presidency, until we address all of these interconnected fundamental issues that we've been talking about: our
Yep.
food, our health, what we should value, technology, and all this kind of stuff. And when we have this major system taking over so much, like, people were very upset about the death of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And it's like, yeah, I mean, she served for a long time and she did a lot of great things, but also it's like, wow, now we're worried because one person died.
Yeah.
It's like no system. We shouldn't live in a system where that because of the death of one person that we're afraid now. Like we shouldn't imbue
Totally.
this system with so much power, you know.
Yeah,
So
no,
it
that's huge. I mean,
yeah,
it's really just we're giving our power away by even just thinking in that way.
right, right.
Even if that person does technically have this certain amount of power, we're giving away our power to just consent to that and say like, "Yep, that's how I view reality too." Like she does have all that power, and the fact that she died, we're in big trouble. Like I'm sorry. I mean, maybe I'll change my tune when I'm locked in a FEMA camp because I didn't do what so and so told me to do. But I'm just saying, like, if we all decide, the more and more people get on this vibe and decide, like, no, I'm going off grid. I'm starting a local community. I'm gonna buy and sell with my local farms. I'm gonna garden. I'm gonna hunt. And we form these like strong, resilient local networks to where we reduce our dependency upon these giant in global technocratic institutions, and we sort of bring it back down to the local communal level as much as we can. I mean, as much as feasibly possible. I think just that act in and of itself is probably one of the most powerful political things we could do. And it will cause its own chain reaction and change that it doesn't have to be through the political system. Maybe somebody sees what you're doing on social media, or somebody from your community comes and sees what you're doing and it inspires them to do the same thing, to where it's just this global chain reaction that we could have never, you know, considered, that has much more power than anything we could do through the established political system.
Totally, yeah, and the locality of it, it's decentralized and peer to peer. Like it's people that are doing like similar things. Like I found out about this guy, Dr. Sabi.
Hmm.
Do you know about Dr. Sabi?
I don't think so.
I think he was from I'm not sure exactly where he was from, but he was advocating. He healed himself and he healed other people through a nutrition practice. And so I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then I think he like mysteriously died because he
Mm.
was saying that he had found a cure for a lot of diseases and stuff through nutrition. And one of his big things was sea moss. And so um, uh, a friend of mine found someone on social media who has an Etsy store who like grows this sea moss, and then so it's like these networks. We can use technology and we can use the sort of structure that we've built in this world to connect with other people that are doing all these other things out there. So I can trade you something from my farm, and you can send me something of yours. Like I've got chanterelle mushrooms and
Yeah.
then I'll send them over to you, and you could send me some creminis or something. And
Yes.
so it's like this kind of system can be enabled. Um, However, we definitely have been really, really comfortable in just giving our own intuition, our own cognitive abilities, and our thought and control away to experts and authority figures. Oh, well, that scientist, well, he knows what's right for my body and my mind and for me. So I trust him. He's on the news. He's wearing a suit, so he must be right. It's like,
Yep.
well, no one knows but you. Like we really have to be the sole arbiters of truth and reality for ourselves. We can't really totally defer to other people to have dominion over that. The final say. We have to have the final say.
Yes. Sole Arbiters of Truth. I think that's the title for the podcast. And that's probably a good line to end it on. I see we've been going for 2 hours. It's nice. I feel like we could just keep going, but I don't want to keep you forever. So
No,
I'm
it's
getting
cool,
kind of
man. Yeah.
hungry too, but
Yeah, me too. Me too. Yeah. Good, man. Yeah, Jacob. Yeah, this was awesome. Thank you so much.
yes.
I love these conversations, and I
Yeah.
hope to have more of them. So we'll do it again on my show.
Yeah, I was gonna say we might have to just start making it a semi-regular thing because it flows nice. So definitely.
Cool.
All right, man.
Thanks.